Coming up, the Nets cut Dariq Whitehead and drew Timme. What does the move say about Sean Marks drafting, and who gets the final roster spot? I'll answer those questions right now.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome in to the Locked On Nets podcast right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. I'm Erik Slater, Brooklyn Nets beat reporter for ClutchPoints.com. Thank you for making me your first listen of the day. This show is 100% free on all those great platforms. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. And on today's show, I'm going to be joined by Lucas Kaplan to react to Brooklyn cutting Dariq Whitehead and Drew Timme. We'll discuss whether we feel the Nets made the correct decision and what this could signal about their roster plans entering the regular season. Joining the pod now, we got Lucas Kaplan of Nets Daily. And Lucas, we got Nets roster news. Yesterday, it came in that Brooklyn waived Dariq Whitehead and Drew Timme. So we're going to talk about both those guys. We'll talk about Sean Marks. We'll talk about who is in contention for this final roster spot. But first, focusing on these guys who were cut, and Dariq Whitehead being the bigger story of the two, a guy who was a first-round pick by the Nets just 2 years ago. And, it was, if you would have told me in, July or August that the Nets were going to cut Dariq Whitehead, I wouldn't have been shocked, but I would have been pretty surprised. But since we've got to training camp, there really have been, of these guys who are on the roster bubble, there have been things we've heard, praise given to some other guys, and it was really all quiet on the Dariq Whitehead front, which obviously wasn't a positive sign coming off the injuries and the struggles that he's had. And then it culminates with him being cut and probably guys like Tyrese Martin or Jalen Wilson battling for that final roster spots. When it came across your screen that the Nets were actually doing this and they were going to part ways with the guy that they drafted in the first round just 2 years ago, what was your initial reaction?
A little bit of melancholy and not much more. Like you said, I don't think it's that surprising. I wrote something on him a little while ago on Nets Daily, and I kind of pointed out, even if you go through their social media presence through training camp, through Macau, you didn't see anything about Whitehead. Like not one highlight of him hitting a three, making a play off the bounce. Like it just felt like he was trending toward becoming the forgotten man on the roster. And this was always a possibility, albeit probably the lowest end one when you take a swing like the Nets did in the 2023 draft in the first round. And I'm sure we'll talk about it, but it's just, yeah, they got the lowest end outcome.
Yeah, and you look at what Dariq did last season, and I got a chance to see him play in person in some G League games because I went to the G League showcase in Orlando, and you could probably just tell this if you looked at his numbers. But when I was watching those games were really ugly, first of all. And then when I'm watching Dariq, it's just against G League competition, and nothing that he was doing was really standing out to me. And even amongst G League competition, just from an athleticism standpoint, he really just didn't look like he was standing out. And we saw him get up to the NBA, and he had the good, 3-point shooting games. But outside of that, like this, it was almost like Dariq Whitehead was like similar to Noah Clowney from the sense of the shot profile. All he was doing was taking threes. And then if you asked him to go to the rim and, get to the rim, lay up, anything like that, it just wasn't happening. And obviously for Noah, that's not really an athleticism issue. It just has to do with some of his limitations as a ball handler. But for Dariq, there just wasn't one skill really outside of the 3-point shooting that stood out. When you look that inferior athletically to some of these other guys, you're going to have a really hard time playing the wing. And it's unfortunate, but just coming off of those 3 lower leg surgeries that he had, the athleticism just looks zapped, and the Nets gave him a year to see if it would come back. And based on them making this move, it just didn't seem like it has. And it really didn't seem like that in the limited minutes that he played in the summer league, in the preseason games.
Yeah, no. And even in the G League, like he was a career, I think in around like 46 career G League games, if I'm not mistaken, career true shooting percentage of like 51. Even the 3-point shooting, which was a much bigger sample size in the G League than in the NBA, where, you know, he cleared 40% and got really hot at times, was in the low 30s. He just never had a productive stretch of basketball, even in the G League. And it gets late early, and age 19 to age 21 is a huge difference. And the Nets just really didn't see enough progress to keep him around. And it sounds harsh, but I think if you followed his career as closely as we have, it's not unfair to say that.
Yeah, I wouldn't say it's unfair. I mean, Dariq, obviously, he had the issues at Duke. He had a foot surgery, and then he came out. And, you know, during his first season, he only played about 4 games, and then that was cut short by a shin surgery. So he had 3 lower leg surgeries in like a 2-year span or even less than a 2-year span. And, you know, he had last offseason to get healthy. He played the year, and then they had this offseason also to focus on his body. But this really would have been only his second healthy season. Are you at all surprised that the Nets didn't give him that third season to see if anything physically came back and the skill set could round into form? Because this is a guy who in high school, I mean, that's a while ago at this point, he was a pretty dynamic athlete. And the Nets, you know, they gave him 2 seasons, but are you surprised there wasn't any longer of a runway to see if that stuff could come back?
No, not really, because, you know, in this NBA, 2 years is a long time for a prospect to show something. And Dariq wasn't this infallible prospect besides the health concerns, right? Like, even in his Duke tape, I mean, I guess you could go back to the high school stuff where obviously the athleticism was, you know, a world of difference. But he did have concerns like, okay, when you get inside the arc and there's like a dynamic situation and multiple reads, like decision making, what does, you know, going to the rim look like for you? So it's not that it was solely health, but obviously the lack of health didn't help his skill progression. And I get it, because it's almost, you know, it seems like at this point, Dariq's path to NBA relevancy is going to have to be an unconventional route. It's going to have to be overseas. It's going to have to be a different organization. And when you're looking at the Nets now with the 5 first-round rookies, many of whom are guard, wing types, you know, again, positionless basketball, whatever. And even, you know, guys that they may want to see, like, yeah, you can say Tyrese Martin's 26. They really like him, and I understand why they think he might blossom into a rotation player. Or Kobe Buffkin, who's the same age as Dariq. Like, I would rather swing on Buffkin right now. I know he hasn't shown a ton, but it's just the bodies ahead of him start to stack up, and I really just didn't see a pathway to minutes for him on this team. And that is a result of the lack of health, but I don't think the Nets were in a position to just play him a ton this year, even though they're going to be bad. And then that's ultimately why I'm not surprised that the runway wasn't longer.
Yeah, there were multiple things as we got further into training camp that it was just clear were not working in Dariq's favor. One of them was obviously that's brought 5 rookie first-round picks in. And obviously there are a lot of those guys were ball handlers and things along those lines. But even then, I had part of me that was like, the Nets took this guy in the first round 2 years ago. They're still in the early stages of a rebuild. I thought that his youth compared to, you know, some of these other roster bubble guys, like if you look at Dariq, who's 21, compared to a guy like Tyrese Martin, who's 26, 27, I thought that 5 years of difference could keep Dariq around, or even a guy like Jalen Wilson, who's 3 or 4 years older than Dariq. But I think we've seen it in the preseason and everything we've heard in training camp. It was pretty clear that Tyrese and Jalen were so far ahead of him in terms of what they were doing on the court that it would have been really hard for the Nets to justify keeping Dariq over guys like that. And then you also have the financial component of it. The Nets have to reach the salary floor, and by waiving Dariq's $3.3 million guaranteed salary, that still counts towards their books. And then they can keep one of these other non-guaranteed guys, which gets them up towards the salary floor. So there were multiple things working against Dariq, and it didn't.
I mean,
really...
what was he going to show by Halloween, right? Because Halloween is the deadline for them to pick up the next year option on his contract to end his rookie contract. I mean, at some point, it's okay to leave a little bit to the imagination in terms of they've seen him for 2 years. Training camp, all this stuff, like what would have happened in the next 3 weeks for them to change their mind about that option? Would it be all of a sudden an athleticism burst out of nowhere and like he gets way better in a week? You know, are they really going to play him on opening night? So I think there's just not enough benefit there to find a different way to get to the salary floor, which, as you mentioned, is another thing here. It's like, yeah, we know what it is at this point. Let's get to the salary floor. And you can say he's 26, he's 21, Tyrese is 26, but at some point it does help to foster this culture of like just keeping the better basketball players around and competitiveness and rewarding Tyrese for what he's done.
Yeah, that stuff matters. And, I think that it would have seemed kind of hypocritical for the Nets in the eyes of a lot of players to keep Dariq, over some of these other guys who have clearly shown more. But also, there was the draft, component of it and the prior standing and pedigree of the guy in regards to the organization that could have played a role here. It ultimately didn't. But to some fans, this seems to be a referendum on Sean Marks' drafting or a demerit. And it might be a demerit, but I don't think that it's a referendum. And why do I think that's the case? We'll get into all of that when we continue Locked On Nets after a quick break. Most people can't name all their financial accounts or even what they're worth, whether it's 401ks, properties, or investments. And when you don't have the full picture, you can end up leaving money on the table. That's why there's Monarch Money. It's an all-in-one personal finance tool that brings your entire financial life together in one clean, easy-to-use interface on your laptop or your phone. Guys, Monarch is built for people with busy lives. If you've ever put off organizing your finances, Monarch is for you. Monarch does the heavy lifting for you. You can link all your accounts in minutes, see clear data visuals, get smart categorization of your spending, and finally feel in control of your money without ever touching a spreadsheet. Guys, you can identify why you aren't saving as much as you want. Monarch helps you notice an inefficient investment allocation and discover forgotten 401ks from past jobs. You can maximize your investments, increase your savings rate, and easily review finances with your partner or financial advisor, keeping a clear view of your financial health week to week and long term. Guys, don't let financial opportunities slip through the cracks. Use code LOCKEDONNBA at monarchmoney.com in your browser for half off your first year. That's 50% off your first year at monarchmoney.com with code LOCKEDONNBA. Basketball season is here, and nothing beats being in the arena for those opening games. But let's be real, getting tickets can be a total headache. Between waiting in queues, surprise fees, and prices that jump right before checkout, it's easy to get frustrated when all you want to do is cheer on your team. That's where Game Time comes in, the app that gives fans the advantage. It's your ultimate life hack for scoring amazing NBA tickets fast, easy, and stress-free. Guys, I've used the Game Time app to grab seats, and it couldn't have been simpler. I had great seats in minutes. I love that what you see is what you pay. There are no hidden fees at checkouts. Plus, I could see exactly what my view looked like before I bought the tickets with their in-app seat view feature. Their zone deals are also a game changer. You pick the section, Game Time picks your seats, and you save big. You can even find NBA tickets for under $25. Guys, take the guesswork out of buying NBA tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. That's code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Swipe, tap, tickets, go. Coming back from the break, continuing today's Locked On Nets episode, talking with Lucas Kaplan about the Nets' decision to part ways with Dariq Whitehead, their 2023 first-round pick. And Lucas, there's obviously a subset of the Nets fan base that isn't too fond of Sean Marks and a lot of things he's done, and rightfully so. But I think that, some of their disagreements with Sean have trended into the draft space, especially with how active the Nets have been in that space in recent years. And this Dariq Whitehead cut some people have seen as sort of a referendum on Sean Marks' drafting. And I just find that kind of strange, honestly, because if you look at Sean Marks in this regime, there's places to criticize them, which we can, and I think we will get into in a little bit. But drafting, I don't think is one of them. And I think some fans just have a skewed view of what a successful track record looks like in the draft, especially where the Nets have been picking. I mean, if you look at Sean Marks' drafting, in terms of first-round picks, he's made, I think, 8. I mean, I'm going to include Nick Claxton in that conversation, who was the first pick of the second round. But you look at these guys like Karis LeVert, Jared Allen, John and Musa. I haven't said Musa's name in a while. I forgot how to pronounce it. Nick Claxton, Cam Thomas, Day'Ron Sharpe, Noah Clowney, Dariq Whitehead. That's 8. I'm omitting this year's class because we don't know what those guys are yet. But look at those 8 picks. Those are all picks in 20 to 31 in that range. And I'd say 5 out of those 8 are hits. That could grow to 6 if Noah Clowney shows improvement. But that's a pretty outstanding hit rate at that portion of the draft. So what is your opinion? Does this Dariq Whitehead cut to you say anything about Sean Marks' drafting? And why do you think, the fan reaction or the fan takes on what his draft track record looks like, I think are a little out of whack?
First of all, fans should be happy that Sean doesn't feel that he has to hold on to Dariq to prove a draft record or because they invested a first round pick in him. That would be sillier decision making, right? The sunk cost of it all. But they was very obvious what the Dariq sell was at the time, right? If, let's say, he entered the draft out of high school, if that had been allowed, he would have been a top 10, top 15 pick easily. He falls after a year at Duke. I'm sure many teams were scared off, by the medicals. And when the Nets drafted him, it was, hey, for a team that desperately needs an infusion of young talent, as they did at the time, this was right after the first round sweep at the hands of the Sixers, where they had very few young contributors. It was, Cam Thomas and Day'Ron Sharpe. It was, this team really needs, a young core to build around, and Dariq could hit, and he has this great pedigree, and he could be like an all-star offensive talent, but here's the downside. And so, neither of us, nor any Nets fan, knew the medical records at the time and knew how likely either scenario was. But at the time, it was considered a pretty wise swing, especially because they also were drafting Noah Clowney. Which was a prospect. He didn't have injury concerns. So you draft a guy. Sorry, last thing. You draft a guy you believe in, and you draft a guy that, is a big swing. And they swung and missed, but I don't think it is some terrible decision or black mark on his record.
Yeah, exactly. Like when you have 2 picks there, and I don't think any pick in the 20s is going to be a safe pick because the hit rate on those picks is just extremely low, which speaks to, I think, Sean Marks in this front office's track record being very impressive from a draft perspective. But you have one guy that maybe you view as a little bit more of a safe prospect in Noah Clowney, or safer, and then you make the swing. And I think I remember going back to that draft and this past draft, going into a rebuild, there's a lot of fans who wanted the Nets to take that swing, and they took it. And I'm sure a lot of fans were happy about Dariq Whitehead, and they saw this pick and they said, oh, this guy's a former 5-star recruit, number 2 player in the country. Like, we could get excited about this. And I'm sure they did the same way that the Nets front office did. And we talked to, I talked to Sean right after that draft, and I remember him saying that Dariq obviously has the concerns with his foot and things like that, but he had the surgery done by Martin O'Malley, who is the same doctor who did Karis LeVert's surgery on his foot. Karis LeVert had those same concerns. He fell in the draft. He bounced back, and he gained back that athleticism and has, developed a really nice NBA career for himself. Dariq, the Nets took a swing, and it didn't work out. But I don't think it's any sort of a referendum on, the way that this front office is drafted. It's strange to me for people to go after this front office for drafting, which I feel like has been their strength, throughout this Sean Marks tenure. I don't think people realize how infrequently, these 20s picks or into the second round, how often they hit. The hit rate on these picks is very low. And there's
how often you can flip a guy like Jared Allen 3 years after you draft him for a first, which leads to James Harden. That was a vital component to building what was, probably the most talented team in franchise history.
Yeah, and you look at these guys, we talk about Jared Allen and Nick Claxton, and sure, maybe the Nets gave Nick Claxton a charitable contract. But these are 2 guys who signed 9-figure contracts, or in Claxton's case, just about 9 figures. You got Cam Thomas, a guy a lot of people are clamoring to pay him. You got Day'Ron Sharpe, looks like a really promising young big man. You got Karis LeVert, has turned into a guy who's going to play in the NBA for a decade plus. I just think that the draft record that Sean Marks has put forth, and BJ Johnson and everybody involved with it in this Nets front office, I think it's been really good. And it's been, I think, better than most people could hope for. And, we got to talk a little bit more about who gets that last roster spot and things along those lines. But is there any hope for you that Dariq Whitehead could maybe turn this around and, catch on somewhere else?
Yeah, I mean, I think it'll take a long time for him. I really do see the Europe route for him where he can just play really high level competitive basketball in a stable environment and get a lot of minutes doing so, because that's not happening for him in the NBA right now. And it's tough for me to imagine him going to a G League team and being that team's focus. We're getting you touches, we're getting you minutes. I think it's just going to have to be somewhere else. And I really hope the New Jersey native can do it and overcome these odds. Lord knows he's going to work hard and have a positive attitude along the way. And it stinks that his Nets career has kind of ended like this, but it's possible. Anything is. And same for Drew Timme.
Yeah, we're going to talk about Timme after a quick break, but yeah, Dariq, great kid, was always extremely positive, extremely bright amidst all of the things that he was going through with the media, with the coaches, with everybody involved. It just didn't work out for him. So we'll see if he can catch on somewhere else. We got Drew Timme. We got to talk about what this could look like for him. Could he potentially be back with the Nets? How do we feel about the Nets waiving him? And then also, who gets this last standard roster spot? So we'll get into all that when we close out Locked On Nets after a quick break. The NFL season is here, and FanDuel has an offer you don't want to miss. Right now, new customers can bet just $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win. That's right. Pick a bet, put down $5, and if it hits, you'll unlock $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. Guys, FanDuel gives you so many ways to play. You can build parlays, try player props, and even follow live lines during games. It makes football even more exciting when you've got a little something riding on the action. Whether you're a casual fan or love diving into the stats, FanDuel makes the game day experience so much better. So what are you waiting for? Visit FanDuel.com to download the FanDuel app today and get started. Coming back from the break, closing out today's Locked On Nets episode, talking with Lucas Kaplan about the Nets' decision to waive Dariq Whitehead and Drew Timme. And Timme was a guy who came in and seemed like he had some pretty good standing with the Nets. They acquired him. The Nets G League affiliate acquired him midway through last season. He absolutely dominated with them during the second half of the season last year in Long Island, had multiple 50-point performances, was just playing some of the best basketball of his career. He gets the call up. He looks pretty good. And then he earns the 2-year non-guaranteed deal. And the Nets decide to waive him. And it just seemed like it was a situation where they have Nick Claxton and Day'Ron Sharpe ahead of them at center. They had Danny Wolf come in through the draft, a guy who's going to play minutes at center. And it just didn't really seem like there was space for him. But the Nets do have an open two-way spot, and he is eligible to sign in that spot if he doesn't receive a better opportunity elsewhere. So how did you feel about the Timme cut? And do you think that he's a guy who will get a standard contract or an opportunity somewhere else, or do you think he could be back with the Nets on this two-way?
I don't know about a standard contract, but I wouldn't be shocked. I mean, he's genuinely shown some offensive ability that teams would really like out of their backup five, right? Like handle the ball at the high post, hit cutters, hit some threes, play in the dribble handoff game. And I think the Nets would probably be open to bringing him back on a two-way. But ultimately, I'm not surprised by the cut. I mean, they did just draft Danny Wolf, and not to make the easiest comparison of all time, but it is right there, and Danny's going to have to play at some point, and there's no sense really in holding on to Drew Timme so tightly that you maybe block a rookie's path to minutes.
Yeah, and it just with Timme, I think that he's shown a lot of promising stuff, and I know that the Nets like him. Like I talked to Steve Hetzel, the Summer League coach, he was just cooking people at Summer League, and I really enjoyed watching him. He's obviously a great dude and just does a lot of exciting things on the court, but it's just about his greatest skill has been this post scoring, this finishing, this, secondary ball handling, a lot of these things that aren't necessarily going to be things that he's doing in an NBA rotation a ton. The 3-point shooting is a big question mark. And this is just a center. If you look at centers who play in today's NBA, you got to be able to protect the rim, space the floor, play defense on the perimeter, all these different skills that Timme wasn't necessarily bringing to the table. I think the 3-point shot is going to be huge for him. Stroke obviously looks good, but up to this point, he hasn't shot really a high percentage at any stop, except for the Nets Long Island last season. But we'll see if that can come along. I wouldn't be shocked if he got a standard spot somewhere else, but he could be a guy who's back with the Nets G League team, but are back with the Nets on a two-way spot. But if I'm him, I'm kind of looking around and saying they got Nick Claxton, they got Day'Ron Sharpe, they just drafted Danny Wolf. There might be a spot that's better for me somewhere else, but we'll see how it plays out. But last thing we got to get into is who gets this last roster spot. And it does seem like right now the guys battling for it are the non-guarantees, which are Tyrese Martin and Jalen Wilson. Before we get to those guys, is there anyone else who you would throw into the conversation? I think the two guys, Haywood Highsmith and Kobe Buffkin, are guys I could see on the roster bubble. I think I'd be pretty shocked if either one of them gets cut. What is your opinion on that before we talk about Martin and Wilson?
You can maybe throw Kobe into the three, to make that a group of three with Wilson and Martin. I think Haywood Highsmith is safe. I just think that worst case scenario, if he shows that he's healthy and he shows that he hasn't lost a massive step, then a team, you can at least barter with a team for like a conditional second or a couple seconds at the trade deadline. And, he seems like a good vet to have around. So I do think it'll come down to Wilson, Martin, and Buffkin's contract is guaranteed. So the Nets could waive him and it would count towards the salary floor. They're not quite there yet, I believe.
They're right below it.
Yeah. But either way, I think it might be fair to throw Kobe in there. I don't know. Who do you think is the front runner to, I guess, the unlucky front runner to get cut?
I'd say it's probably Wilson at this point, just based off of everything we've seen from Tyrese Martin. I mean, I don't say that confidently because I know that the Nets like Jalen. And do I think that Sean Marks wants to cut 2 draft picks, from 2 years ago? Like, Wilson was the number 51 pick. He's already exceeded expectations, but I know they do like him. But I also know that they really like Tyrese Martin too. Like, I've talked to people in and around the organization that have raved about what he did this offseason. I talked to Jordy Fernandez about it. And Jordy, when you're talking about Tyrese, like, there's a lot of coach speak and they say good things and complimentary things about a lot of guys. But when you talk to him about Tyrese, he always says these things like, Tyrese is about everything that we want to be here. Like, he does all the right things. He sets an example for all these other guys and all those things. And not that he doesn't say them about Jalen, but I just hear something else when he talks about Tyrese. And then we get Michael Porter Jr. saying he's been the most impressive player at Nets camp. I interpreted that as relative to expectations. And then you look at the Nets, last preseason game on Sunday, like, Tyrese comes in and he scores 11 points in eight fourth quarter minutes, makes some really tough threes and one on a backdoor cut, pretty much wins them the game. And it's just like what he's doing in the preseason is matching everything else we've heard.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure. Like,
so
I just think he's a better player than Jalen Wilson.
He is. Right? I mean, right now it would be hard to dispute that. In the first preseason game, right, he's clearly in that top 10, that rotation. And then in the second preseason game, he gets replaced in the top 10 by Drake Powell. And I get why. Like, that doesn't seem totally just merit-based, but, they drafted Drake Powell. They want to, I'm sure he's been working hard, rehabbing his knee tendinopathy. They throw him in there. He plays well. And then Tyrese Martin comes in and plays against guys that he's frankly just supposed to be way better than, and he looks way better than them. And he may be 26, but his trend line is pointing pretty high up, pretty steeply upwards. And Jay Will, like, it's just, listen, I don't know the likelihood of either of them being a tried and true rotation player for years to come, but it does feel like Tyrese Martin has enough varied skills, a little bit of a dribble pass shoot guy, maybe needs a little bit of work on all three, but for the most part can dribble, pass, and shoot. And Jalen, like, I just don't know what his role is in a high-end rotation. Like, he shoots a lot of threes and they look real pretty when they go in, but we kind of have a decent sample of him being a low 30 shooter that just is not an NBA level athlete on the wing. So what is he actually going to do?
Yeah, like, if I just pose the question to you right now, like, what is Jalen Wilson better than Tyrese Martin at?
Maybe, I don't know. Maybe rebounding.
Maybe. Is like that was the only thing I was going to say. I mean, you look at them
cutting.
Like, Yeah, and maybe. I mean,
Maybe.
athletically, like Jalen's really, made his money or, created his goodwill with his motor. And you just look at Tyrese Martin's skills. Like a reason that I, in the summer could have seen Tyrese Martin sticking around is he's the most proven 3-point shooter out of any of these non-guaranteed guys. Like you said with Jalen played 4 seasons at Kansas. He's now been here for 2 seasons. Like that's a 6-season sample size. He's never been a good 3-point shooter, like really even a decent one. Even if the former looks good or you notice the makes, just look at the percentages. And Tyrese Martin, like nothing great or, anything to write home about, but he's a guy who's, I think like mid-30s, around 35%. He
also
shows
way more ball handling prowess.
Yeah. Another thing that you got to get into. I mean, this is a guy who has some legit like secondary ball handling chops, like pick and roll stuff that he can do, creating off the bounce for himself and others. And he's a guy who made he made 9 or 10 threes in a game last season. I mean, like you don't do that unless you're a good shooter, I feel like. So we'll see, but I think that I wouldn't be surprised if either of them got cut in favor of the other, but I think Tyrese, based on what we've heard and seen, should be the favorite. And like Jalen being the number 51 pick in a draft, like would it be a good success story for Sean Marks if he worked out? Yeah, but I think Sean just showed by cutting Dariq Whitehead that's not really playing a role in his thought process. And Jalen's a guy who played 4 college seasons, so he's not that much younger than Tyrese. Yeah. It's like a year and a half. So we'll see how it plays out, but I think both of us agree Tyrese should be viewed as the front runner at the moment. But we got a lot more net stuff coming up. We got to talk about Danny Wolf and Drake Powell. We're going to have an episode talking about those guys and much more. So, Lucas, appreciate you taking the time as always, and we'll have you back on tomorrow. That does it for today's episode of Locked On Nets. Hope you guys enjoyed the talk with Lucas. If you do not already, make sure to subscribe to Locked On Nets on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts, whether Apple Podcasts or Spotify. If you have a second and you enjoy the content, smash that like button, leave a comment, leave a 5-star review. Anything you can do to engage is much appreciated. We got the Nets' final preseason game, and then we're rolling on into the regular season, so I'll have coverage of all that and more when I'm back tomorrow talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.